Malaysia, a multi-ethnic society that embraces Malays, Chinese, Indians and other groups, is an ideal example of how to achieve cultural coexistence. How has Malaysia balanced such diverse communities while preserving their respective identities? And as the world is largely dominated by Western culture, how can dialogue among Asian civilizations build confidence among Asians of our own identities? Earlier, I spoke to Ong Tee Keat, a prominent figure in Malaysian society and chairman of the Center for New Inclusive Asia, a think tank based in Malaysia, to hear his views on the topic. I started by asking him how he describes the rich diversity of Malaysian culture.
I would call Malaysia a land of diverse cultures and religions. And since my younger days, I had been exposed to diverse cultures, and we learn to live together side by side with other races of different religions, different norms, peacefully. And I call that the coexistence in harmony.
How was it possible? What was the key to managing such a diverse relationship? Because you're bound to have conflicts, right? Different habits, different beliefs, different traditions. How do you make sure that everybody can be reasonably happy?
Well, first of all, we need to know Malaysia, well, actually is a confluence of three major cultures or civilizations, namely the Islamic civilization, Chinese civilization for the Chinese, and the Indian civilization. And at the same time, we were once colonized by the British, and certainly, in a way, we had the opportunities to learn some of the norms and values of the past colonial masters. And that makes us better equipped to live together with other races with tolerance. Of course, tolerance may not be tolerance of others.
You mean, where does this tolerance come from? Is it the result of the confluence of all of these different civilizations, or the influence from the West?
Tolerance, of course, I think that largely depends on, firstly, of course, we need to know that none of the races should be dominant, right? No doubt. The Malays constitute the majority. But in the final analysis, now, we need to know cultures is something that, that has been evolving and mutually enriching one another. And even today, I would say that the ethnic Chinese in Malaysia, our kind of practices may not be the same as our counterparts in mainland China, because we have been influenced by the Malays and the Indians, or even the Western values. That explains the diversity.
Yeah. Well, what is the role of dialogue or exchange or mutual learning in achieving the kind of overall harmony of the Malaysian society?
Dialogues, of course, that may sound a little bit ceremonial in nature, but more importantly, that largely depends on our daily interaction and engagement with other races. When I said we live together with other races of various religious faith, certainly we need to appreciate others' cultures, values and norms. It's not just a matter of tolerance. Tolerance is just a basic fundamentals.
Sure.
But certainly that is not sufficient for us to build a nation of diverse cultures.
What else has to be done?
And on top of that, of course, unity in diversity is not just a notion, but it is something that could be put into practice. And that differs from the melting pot theory as was practiced in the West. Now, because until today, the ethnic Chinese in Malaysia, for instance, we still can find the elements, the cultural elements of Chinese civilization, Chinese cultures in the Malaysian perspective. No doubt it might have been influenced by some other elements.
Do you have a concrete example to give?
Say, for instance, our Lunar New Year celebration. Lunar New Year, well, certainly is dear to the heart of all the ethnic Chinese across the globe, including Malaysian Chinese. But at the same time, you might be surprised to see that some of the practices, especially in terms of delicacies and the food that we have to offer to our guests, now many a time that might be dominated by some of the local flavors, the local delicacies that may appear to be more Malay-oriented.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when I was talking about dialogue, I didn't really mean dialogue sitting down and talk per se. I meant the kind of interaction, you know, appreciating each other, living with each other, and trying to understand each other.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that is also the fundamental idea behind this conference on dialogue of civilizations. What is your thought on that?
Well, I would say this is very timely indeed. Dialogue, as you have rightly put it, it provides a platform for the various cultures to interact, and also at the same time a very good platform for us to learn from one another. Rarely do we have such an opportunity to interact with so many nationalities of different background. And say, for instance, today, for the first time, I have the opportunity to interact with some friends from near and far. And sometimes we might take for granted that we know or we understand the cultures of certain people, but actually we may not have the in-depth knowledge. And I would say, after having listened to some of the speeches and some of the papers presented at the dialogue session, I'm glad that this is a very good learning curve for me, to acquire some new knowledge.
Do you mean that actually you didn't know about other Asian countries as well as you should have?
Well, in fact, I would, in Asia, would ever claim that he or she is well versed with all the Asian elements within the region.
Well, we certainly can't say that, but in comparison to our understanding, our interest in the West, in the United States or in Europe, do we have a relatively less interest or less literature in our own cultures, probably?
Well, in fact, on one hand, of course, I think certain parts of Asia, we may need to rebuild our confidence in our own cultures. Firstly, of course, we need to understand our own cultures thoroughly, if possible, right? Sometimes that may be a tall order for many to follow.
Why?
Because not everybody has a kind of flair in appreciating cultures, and more so, Asia is such a land of complexity, where most of the nations had been colonized by the Western powers at one point of time. And we had been baptized in the kind of Western cultures since our younger days. Even our history books were primarily written in the Western perspective. I think that makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, I was observing a kind of a vicious cycle, for instance, because we were less developed. So our way to influence the narrative, to influence ourselves, is not as powerful, as effective as the more developed the countries. And then because of this, we were less interested, we were less confident in our own future, past and future. So do you see a possibility of breaking that kind of vicious cycle?
Yes, certainly. And I would say the dialogue session today is not just a convenient platform for the interaction of various cultures, but at the same time, this provides us a very good opportunity to relook, to revisit our own cultures with confidence. I must call that the process of, or beginning of confidence building in appreciating our own cultures.
Finally, you were Malaysia's transport minister, but from 2008 to 2010, we know this famous infrastructure connectivity initiative that China has proposed, the Belt and Road Initiative, and Malaysia is a very important partner in that initiative. And now I understand that some projects, after some twists and turns, seem to be moving forward. What's the relationship between the Belt and Road Initiative and the kind of revisiting our own shared identities?
Well, I'm hopeful to see that with the Belt and Road Initiative in place, now this would give us an opportunity to have more frequent people-to-people connectivity, because this is one of the 5 pillars as enshrined in the Charter of BRI. Today, I could see the presidential speech delivered by President Xi Jinping. Well, actually, it's a wake-up call for the Asian people in regaining our lost confidence in our own cultures, and also at the same time, this is a very opportune time now for us to initiate inter-Asian culture engagement, and this may provide a very good template for other continents to follow as well. And ultimately, I would like to see, more and more cultural engagement of this sort be hosted in various parts of the world.
Now that we talk about this, before I wrap up, what's the end game?
Yep.
What's the end game? What are we looking for?
Well, in fact, we are looking for a more inclusive Asia with confidence in our own cultures on one hand, and at the same time, now we need to project our non-confrontational characteristics of our cultures to others, because this could easily be misunderstood by certain quarters, or deliberately distorted by certain quarters, if we don't do that.
My interview with Ong Tee Keat, Mr. Wen Shijie, a prominent figure of Malaysian society. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LA. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point, and have a good weekend.